Your Telegram proxy is online almost all the time, and that sounds excellent until you think about the sliver that is left. That missing sliver is not spread evenly across the month in tidy moments nobody notices. It arrives all at once, on the worst possible afternoon, right when a client is waiting on a message or an account needs to receive a code. And it lands as a dead connection with no warning and no explanation. A proxy that works most of the time feels fine right up to the moment it does not, and by then the damage is already done. So let me talk about what actually keeps a proxy online, why uptime is harder than it looks, and what it really takes to be reachable when it counts. I run managed Telegram hosting on dedicated hardware here in Singapore. So uptime is not an abstract number on a status page for me. It is the whole promise. When people pay you to keep an account reachable, a proxy that quietly falls over on a Tuesday is not a small glitch. It is the exact thing they were paying you to prevent. I have watched real endpoints under real load day after day, and I know from the alerts and the logs, not from a hopeful guess, how a proxy actually dies and what it takes to catch it before anyone else does. The handful of ways a proxy actually goes down and why most of them are quiet. Why a server that still answers a ping can be completely useless. What real monitoring looks like and why a shallow check lies to you. How alerting and automatic recovery turn a long outage into a blip. Then redundancy. Why one server on one IP is a single point of failure and what a real failover setup looks like. And finally, the honest limits, because no amount of monitoring makes a burned IP come back. By the end, you will understand why staying online is the hard part, not getting online. Start with how a proxy actually goes down, because the causes are less dramatic than people expect. The process can crash on its own and simply stop listening. The server can reboot for an update or a power blip and never restart the proxy because nobody told it to. The address underneath can get discovered and blocked, so the server is fine, but nobody can reach it. A busy box can run out of memory or open connections and start refusing new ones, and the network path in front of it can change in a way that quietly severs the route. Almost none of these announce themselves. The proxy does not send you a message when it dies. This is where most people get fooled, because the server still answers a ping. A ping only tells you the machine is powered on and the network reaches it. It says nothing about whether the proxy process is actually running, whether it is accepting connections, whether the obfuscation still matches, or whether Telegram traffic is genuinely flowing through it. A box can sit there pinging happily for hours, while the one service you care about is stone dead. Reachable is not the same as usable, and confusing the two is why people believe a proxy is fine long after it stopped carrying a single byte. So real monitoring does not check whether the server is up. It checks whether the proxy actually works from the outside the way a user would. That means opening a genuine connection through the proxy on a schedule, every minute or two, and confirming that it connects and passes traffic, not just that a port is open. A port can be open with nothing useful behind it. The only check worth trusting is the one that reproduces what your users do and fails when they would fail. If your monitoring is happy while your users are stuck, your monitoring is measuring the wrong thing. There is a real difference between a shallow check and a deep one, and it decides whether you find out first or last. A shallow check pings the IP or knocks on the port and calls it a day, and it will swear everything is fine while the service behind it is broken. A deep check goes all the way through, connects as a real client, confirms the handshake, and only then reports healthy. It costs a little more to run, and it is worth every bit, because a monitor that tests the whole path is the one that catches the failure a shallow check sails right past. Monitoring is only half the value, because knowing something broke at 3 in the morning is useless if nobody is told until 9. The point of watching is to be alerted the moment a check fails, so the problem reaches you before it reaches the people relying on the proxy. The worst way to learn your proxy is down is a message for an angry user, because by then it has been down long enough for someone to notice and complain. Good alerting flips that order. You hear about the outage first, quietly, and ideally you have already started fixing it before anyone on the other end even reloads the app. So the being alerted is still not enough on its own, because a human cannot sit and watch a screen around the clock. The next step is automatic recovery, where the system does not just notice the process died, it restarts it, on its own within seconds. A supervisor that watches the proxy and brings it straight back when it stops turns most crashes into a blip nobody ever sees. The same goes for a reboot. The proxy should come back by itself when the server does, without anyone logging in to start it. The outages that hurt are the ones that needed a person, and the person was asleep. Now the bigger problem, the one restarts cannot solve. If everything you run sits on one server behind one IP, then that single address is a single point of failure, and no amount of monitoring changes that. When it gets discovered and blocked, restarting the process does nothing because the process was never the problem. The address is the problem, and there is only one of it. A setup with a single endpoint is fine until the day that endpoint dies, and then it is completely down with nothing to fall back to. One of anything critical is a gamble you eventually lose. The answer is redundancy, which just means having more than one of the thing that can fail. There is a second endpoint on a second clean IP ready to take over the moment the first one goes dark. Real failover is not something you scramble to build after an outage starts. It is a standby that already exists, already warm, so the switch takes seconds instead of hours. When the primary fails a health check, traffic moves to the backup and the people using it feel a brief hiccup at worst instead of a dead connection for the rest of the day. Redundancy is the difference between an outage and an inconvenience. The key word there is warm, because a spare that takes an hour to wake up is barely a spare at all. A cold backup you still have to set up when disaster hits will not save the afternoon. It just means you start building under pressure instead of ahead of time. A warm standby is already running, already reachable, already carrying the same disguise and configuration, waiting quietly to be pointed at. Keeping a pool of clean spare addresses ready in advance, so there is always somewhere healthy to move to, is the unglamorous preparation that makes failover instant instead of a fire drill. There is also planned downtime, which is the kind you actually control, and handling it well is a quiet mark of a serious setup. Servers need updates, and configurations need changes, and if every one of those means the proxy drops for everyone while you work, your users feel your maintenance as an outage. The better way is to move traffic to the standby first. Do the work on the quiet server and move back when it is done, so the maintenance happens behind the scenes and nobody on the connection notices a thing. Downtime you scheduled should never cost your users anything, and with a spare ready it does not have to. This connects directly to something worth remembering, which is that an IP gets discovered eventually no matter how careful you are. Staying online over the long run is not about finding one perfect address that lasts forever, because there is no such thing. It is about noticing the moment an endpoint gets burnt, moving to a fresh one quietly, and pointing everything at the new address before the people relying on it even notice the old one died. Uptime and rotation are the same discipline seen from two angles. You stay up precisely because you are always ready to move. It is also worth saying that a lot of outages are self-inflicted, from running a box so close to its limits that a small spike tips it over. A server already at the edge of its memory or its connection ceiling does not fail gently. It falls over all at once the moment load rises, and that is almost always at the busy peak when it matters most. Leaving real headroom, so the box is comfortable even when everything is active together, prevents a whole category of outages that never had to happen. Uptime starts with not sailing so close to the wall that an ordinary busy hour becomes a crash. Let me be clear about scope, because it matters. Everything here is about keeping a legitimate connection reliable, so that a real account stays reachable, and a real person is not cut off at the worst moment. It is not about hiding a service that should not be running, or about staying up in order to abuse anything. Uptime is simply the boring, essential quality that separates infrastructure you can depend on from a hobby that works until it does not. Wanting your connection to stay online is the same ordinary expectation you have of your electricity or your water. And here is the honest catch, the same one that runs under all of this. Watching the proxy from the outside every minute, checking the whole path and not just the port. Being alerted the instant something fails, restarting on its own. Keeping a warm spare on a clean IP ready to take over, and rotating to a fresh endpoint the moment one gets discovered. Is steady, fiddly, continuous work that never really stops. It is not a thing you set up once and forget. That quiet, relentless attention, the part that actually keeps you online on the day something breaks, is exactly what managed hosting is built to carry. Telegram Vault is managed Telegram hosting on dedicated Singapore hardware. Real handsets on real carrier SIMs from Singtel, M1, StarHub, and Vivify. So your accounts live on clean, stable mobile IPs that are monitored around the clock, with recovery and spare endpoints handled for you, instead of a lone proxy on one data center address that dies quietly the afternoon you are not watching. If that is what you need, start at telegramvault.org. Onboarding begins with a real conversation about your setup, not a checkout page, and the code TGYT gets you a discount when you start. If this changed how you think about uptime, from assuming a proxy is fine because it pings to actually watching whether it works, then subscribe, because there is a lot more on running Telegram accounts and infrastructure cleanly coming on this channel. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.